I'm half Lebanese and
Yeah.
half Moroccan. I did not expect, that we would agree on so many points.
All of the things that you would say are Palestinian, a lot of them are British colonial creations. So, like the kafir, the black and white kafir, the sign of the resistance, designed by John Bagot Pasha. The flag, the red, black, green, white flag, Mark Sykes. The name Palestine, the British colonial name, the
Mm.
borders itself of who is a Palestinian, British colonialist geography.
No, no,
Yeah,
for that I totally agree with you. Even the term like Israel as a country makes more sense for
yeah.
Muslims than Palestine. You know what I mean? That Israel is the name of a prophet. What is your position, generally speaking, on what's happening right now? In
So I
um,
just give you the shortest answer I can, which would be was horrible. The loss of innocent
okay.
life is tragic. I attribute
but but do
90
you
something percent of the blame on Hamas and see
yeah.
Israel as fighting a defensive war in
Mhm.
an incredibly complex battle arena, which, despite all the measures that the Israeli army takes, is inevitably going to lead to the destruction of civilian life, which is tragic. So I see the war
Okay.
as tragic, but I blame Hamas for it.
Yeah. Okay, no, no, fair enough. I agree with you on the second point you said, that it's a very complex war.
Yeah,
Definitely, that's a small area, and mostly Hamas is fighting in a guerrilla type of
yeah.
of, of fashion, which necessarily entails that they're hiding. Because, but I'm not defending Hamas. I
Yeah, no, I
actually
know
don't
you're not.
agree with
You've
politically
made
at
that very
all.
clear. You're against all
But
extremism.
yeah, definitely. But somehow I also think that technically, if they were not hidden, they would lose overnight,
Yeah.
because they don't have also the necessary equipment, and so I agree with you. It's an ugly war, but one point I actually don't get it from the Israeli point of view is not point of view, position.
Yeah.
Sorry, again for my English is if the war is really, as you said, like the way they conduct the war is what was the term you used already? They use it in a
Uh,
like
to minimize, I don't know which word you talk about. To
yeah,
minimize
exactly,
civilian
in a kind
casualties.
of
Yeah.
good way,
Yeah.
like not in a horrible way, not
Yeah.
in a genocidal way.
Yeah.
So my question is, why don't they let any international journalists just get in, to
So,
view that, themselves? Because it's kind of suspicious, you know what I mean?
so,
Like if you have nothing to hide.
it's one of the things. It's a talking point that people who haven't really followed war raise, and so this is a unique war in that it's broadcast into the homes of millions of people, and
Mhm.
ordinary people are forced to see horrific images that they can't unsee of the real cost of conflict, the real cost of war. And
Yeah,
people form opinions on war, which they assume it makes sense to
yeah,
them, and they assume that's what they're saying is normal, but it might not be. So, for instance, people say, why don't they let journalists in? Well, it's commonplace in most conflicts that journalists aren't allowed to the front line. So at the moment, there's a war in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia. Journalists aren't
hmm,
allowed to the front line there. They're not allowed because they get in the way of soldiers. They get in the armies have to maneuver around journalists,
yeah. But what
which
I'm
can be used. So what I was going to answer is so Israel, all of Gaza is a front line. It's a tiny, tiny plot of land,
Mhm.
and journalists embedding themselves in areas where Israel is trying to empty, which is what they're doing. For instance, Israel will evacuate a neighborhood
Yeah,
because they're doing a military operation there. If they've got journalists there providing cover for Hamas, if they're unintentionally or intentionally providing cover, complicating strategy, it endangers Israeli soldiers, and Israel's number one priority in combat is to protect its people, be they civilian or be they soldiers. And so that's why the journalists aren't in. I do get the arguments that when people say, well, it's up to the journalists, if they want to risk their lives being there, then that's on
Yeah,
them.
because I
But
mean, technically, it's also their job. There's war journalists that's what they do, and they help for people to have like a clear idea of what is happening. Because at the end of the day, the Israeli army can say whatever they want. They have a certain position. As well as the Palestinian
so
side. So one of the only way for the outside world to actually know what the hell is happening is through
I
this
mean,
type of
I
journalism.
don't fully buy that because there's no shortage of footage that comes out of Gaza. There's no shortage of journalists in Gaza. Journalism is the biggest profession in Gaza, and albeit those journalists will have huge biases, even if they're against Hamas, they're going to have it because it's such a complex zone. You're
There
not going
will
to have a
always be
neutral journalist in Gaza.
let's agree on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. You totally.
Um,
There will always be biases,
yeah.
even in
And
journalism. But
even if
yeah,
they're anti-Hamas,
yeah,
they're still coming with a bias. Their bias is going to be they want to get rid of Hamas rather than
no,
focus on Israel. And so I do understand the argument that let the journalists in. I think it's a fair argument. I also understand
mhm,
Israel's position. I think it's a fair position that most nations take when engaged in major conflict. And so usually war correspondents aren't on the front line. They're close to the front line.
yep.
But Gaza, I mean, you've seen the images coming out of Gaza. The level of destruction there is, I don't think it's
That's
been
what.
seen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, talking like not like human to human.
Yeah,
As I'm telling you, like I will be honest with you. Most of people are biased,
yeah,
towards what, like, for example, you'd be closer to a certain group of people based on your origin, belief, and so on. Um, but personally, when I see a Jewish boy being killed during the 7th of
yeah,
October massacre, or when I see a Palestinian kid being burned alive,
yeah.
in both cases, for me, it's horrible. In both cases, there are innocent people, and in that platform, I'm gonna be honest with you. Just right before you, there was a guy that told me, "But this kid will grow up being like a Hamas
Yeah,
uh, soldier or whatever." I mean, what the fuck, Like,
yeah.
even though, let's say, worst case scenario, he becomes the worst monster ever. He's still an innocent. We're talking in the present tense. That's
yeah.
with that logic, it's
My
yeah,
personal position, I can't speak for every Israeli. I can speak for myself. My personal
yeah,
position is every child is innocent, and we as
yeah,
adults have a duty of care over them. And if their parents have been so consumed by their
yeah.
ideology that they're willing to sacrifice their own children, then we should do everything we can to liberate their children from their parents. So if the parent is going
Yeah.
to raise a
No, no,
child to be a
no.
Hamas terrorist, then there's a duty on us to save those children. That's my position. Obviously, your position is first to save your own children and then to save your neighbors or even your enemies. But I'm not of them. I despise the talking point that a Palestinian child, a Gazan child, is a future terrorist because
Oh,
no, Allah, only Allah knows the
yeah.
future. We don't.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Only God knows what you will end up being at the end of the day. And yeah, like for me, you have terrible like soldier in the army of Israel. As much
I
as
would
you
agree.
may have terrible. You know,
This is the
it.
thing that most people. You're one of the first people that gets it. The armies. There's the military itself, and they have rules of
Yeah,
engagement, code of conduct, and I'm sure most
definitely.
people would agree that Israel's code of conduct will be of a higher level, with much stricter rules and regulations of how you engage the enemy than Hamas. That's just
Yeah.
like you'd have to be brain dead to argue otherwise.
Mhm.
Um, but it's also an army of conscripts, and everyone in the nation is drafted. So you will have the most lovey-dovey, liberal, lefty peace activist who can be fighting alongside the biggest, nastiest racist in all of Israel, and they're going to behave in that environment in different ways. And
Yeah.
October the 7th was such a traumatic event for the Jewish people that
Yeah.
that guy who already had some pretty dodgy views, you give him a gun and you send him to Gaza to fight the guys that did that, he's probably going to do some nasty things. So
Nasty stuff.
There's a historian called Benny Morris who says that in every war you're going to find atrocities,
Yeah,
and I believe that's going to be the case here in Gaza. But I think when it comes to judging the actions, what I can do is defend the institution, the army, the military, the country. I can't
yeah.
defend every single Israeli because
Every
there's going to
single
be
person.
Israelis that's
But the
doing
big
horrible
problem
things.
in that, you're totally right. And the big problem in that conversation is then you associate everything to a certain person. It's like a person represent the whole group, you know?
Yeah.
So whenever you see an Israeli soldier doing a very, very nasty stuff, then you're like, okay, they're all like that, you know? And you put them all in the same for Palestinian, same for,
Well, that's the
I've
answer you
seen,
got. That's the answer you got when they're saying that child is a future terrorist. It's the exact same.
yeah,
It's like
that's actually that's
there is
very good
definitely a
point.
problem with terrorism in Gaza, without a doubt. The only like political parties in Gaza, the only factions are all militaristic. They believe they're fighting resistance, but they engage in terrorism. Every single faction took part in October the 7th. The Mujahideen, Islamic Jihad, Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigade, all of them took part. And
Mhm.
it's very easy for Israelis, and many of them do now, to look back and there is a degree of truth to this. Look at Gazan society and say the entire nation's been radicalized, and in a way they have, not always in the way that Israelis imagine, but they have definitely been radicalized in that UNRWA and Hamas have been in control of the education since 2007. Well, UNRWA even longer. And both
Yeah,
of them, their entire education revolves around the idea that the Palestinians that are living in Gaza will return to 48
return.
Palestine.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
not only the one
war,
in Gaza,
yeah,
in general, generally
exactly.
speaking, there is that idea of coming back, So it's quite interesting. What do you actually think about this? Do you believe that a Palestinian, person, uh, do you also believe that it's their homeland or not? What
So
is your position?
my position is the definition of a Palestinian is ridiculous. In that the United
No, no,
Nations,
it's
and
the point.
I'll
Just
give you my
enlighten me.
the United Nations or UNRWA defines a Palestinian as anyone whose parents, or has a
Hmm.
not parents, anyone who has an ancestor, one ancestor
Hmm.
that lived in British Mandatory Palestine between 1946 and 1948, 2 years longer. So if your great grandfather was a Kurd from Iran who came
Yeah.
and worked there for 3 years, he arrived in
Hmm.
1945,
Okay.
then the United Nations considers you a Palestinian. Do you need to go, by the way? Because I saw you.
No, 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 no. That's actually fine. You can
Okay.
keep going. That's
Okay,
that's all
cool.
right. Conversation is
Um,
interesting.
no, no. And
I'm
so
good.
I think the definition of a Palestinian is pathetic. So I don't think that someone who came from Iran automatically, if his great grandfather came from Iran for 3 years, automatically has the right to return to this land.
Okay,
However,
but can you?
I would say
Mhm.
that any Arab who's living here today and has never
Yeah.
left the land absolutely has a right, the same right as me, to live here. It becomes much more complicated when you look at those who's left and how do you determine who has a right to return or not. I think the Jewish definition is much
Mhm.
stronger in that you either have a Jewish mother, so you have descent all the way back, or you joined the Jewish people at some point
Yeah.
in our history, and the Jewish people accepted you in the same way that a Muslim can move to Britain and their children are British and they've got the
Yeah.
right. So when it
Mhm.
comes to the right to land, any Arab who's living here absolutely, I believe, has a right to remain in this land. That's my position.
Okay.
Um,
But
you can
yeah.
forfeit that right. So, for instance, if
Okay.
you wage war and you lose the
Yeah.
war, then
Yeah.
you can lose that right. But I think it's for me. I'm on the right to return for those that have left because it's so diluted for most Palestinians that are living out of the land now. Like
Yeah.
that one great grandfather who was here for
Mhm.
3 years, that person considers themselves Palestinian and they believe they have a right to return. And so I'm not as
But
convinced
then
on those.
they can say the same thing from the Jews, that were displaced for thousands of years,
Yeah,
so they could say, okay, in what right,
and they do
what
say,
is your.
it's not,
Yeah, and
it's
they do
not,
say. I
and
mean,
they
that's
do say, yeah,
that's
that's the
that's
argument,
I'm
yeah.
just saying. So
And
yeah, like yeah, but coming back to first something you said, because you know, I guess for sure you seem to be keen on history, but I think you know that the Arabs, they have been, well, I mean the Arabs, okay, so it's quite
Yeah.
clear, you know, they've been living in that region for thousands of years. I think since Omar ibn Khattab.
Yeah, so
Um,
1400 years, and you can make compelling arguments that they would have been Arabs today who descend from Christians, like, or Muslims who descend from
yeah.
Christians who are living here, and they predate. So, so
Also Jews,
absolutely,
I kind of
yeah.
think that,
No, there are Jews. There are Jewish families. So, like
yeah,
Abu
yeah,
Lafia, there's a bakery in Jaffa, near Tel
yeah. Okay,
Aviv,
yeah, yeah.
and it's a Muslim family, Abu Lafia. But Abu Lafia is a
Yeah, yeah.
Jewish name, and so
Hmm.
there's many examples of Palestinian Arab families that have Jewish roots, without a
Yeah.
doubt.
So see, that's what I'm trying to say, is that's what you know, like to can we put a word on legitimacy, you know, that's the thing, because I'm gonna tell you what I hear from the Jewish like
Yeah,
argument, you know, or okay, let's call it the Zionism argument,
yeah.
because it's
I
you
mean,
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Let's split her. It's fine. I'm fine with that. Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
you're just saying, believing that Israel is the homeland of Jews, you know, like that's what Zionism is,
Yeah,
like that's
yeah. I mean, all
term
Jews
that,
believe that Israel is the homeland of the Jews. It's just the
yeah,
non-Zionist, at least religious Jews, the non-Zionist Jews just believe it's not meant to be now; it's meant to be soon.
soon, yeah, when
Messiah comes. Yeah,
the
yeah,
Messiah comes, yeah, exactly. But so I hear two type of arguments regarding the legitimacy of the sovereignty of Israel to be like Jewish homeland. The first one is the first argument is that God has promised this land to the Jews, you know, that so it's the where the that's the, you know, a religious argument, I would say. So this land is promised to us by God. And the second argument that I hear is the fact that um Jewish, like Israelites, you know, I don't know how to say
yeah.
that in
No,
English, but in
Israelite's
French,
fine. Yeah, yeah,
okay, they do come from that land, you know. So originally speaking, they come from that land, you know. So there is like a religious argument and a more I would say um like technically speaking, a it's from where they come from, the
yeah.
folk argument, yeah. So is there another, I mean, do you see another argument for, or is it the only, because
So,
there is, yeah.
so finish what you were
Sorry,
about.
I'm gonna bring my point right now, because there is actually something that I mean, my I don't, I'm quite curious about what you think about this, is the fact that you have okay, the Jews were living there uh, even before Jesus Christ, you know. So when we like when they had the kingdom of Israel, you know, the land of Judea, the kingdom of Israel, and then they were displaced by the Romans when they came, and they forced them out. Actually, it's, and they also called the land Palestina, if I'm not
Yeah,
wrong, uh, in a way to really humiliate the Jews. Reference to, I think, the enemies of the Jews. They were like um, so they had enemies with that name. So it was more in a way to humiliate the Jewish population. But now so I kind of understand this will to come back to the promised land and so on. But isn't it something that every nation could do? You know, let's say the red Indian could do the same with the Americans right now, or the Italians could claim any land since they have the Roman Empire
or,
or
or
the
the
Ottoman Empire.
or the Arabs could come back and create Palestine.
Yeah, or sorry, what?
The
Or you are?
Palestinians, the Arabs, could return and establish
Mhm.
Palestine. It's the same argument. It's
So yeah, you're totally right. What you're saying is interesting. So the only thing is, what I'm trying to say is we're talking about something that happened thousands years ago. You know,
not
like
necessarily. So the examples you gave
even
weren't
before
that.
Jesus Christ.
The examples you gave of, like, I think you said
Yeah,
America, for instance, or Australia, or any of these places,
the
that's
Red
much more
Indians. Yeah,
recent.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Like
that's that's relatively recent history. It's only about 100 years later.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
that
500 years still. But yeah, you're totally right.
I
Yeah.
mean, it depends when you say that they lost all the territory. It depends, but from the
Again,
like the establishment, the
exactly.
Declaration of Independence, etc. When, yeah. But anyway, not getting sidetracked by America. I'll lay out what I believe are the basic cases that people make for Israel. So
Okay.
obviously, and it's the least, unless you're speaking to a religious person, it's the least compelling argument is the one of religion, which you touched on, and that is
Yeah.
that in Christianity, in all the Abrahamic faiths, the land
Definitely.
was given to Bani Israel. In
And
Al
Israel.
Quran,
Yeah.
it says, يقوم يدخلوا الأرض المقدسة التي كتب الله لكم. Kataba, assigned, written to you, to
Okay.
Yakomi. In the Torah, multiple places, but Venatati Eta Aretza Zot Lazaracha Achrecha Echuzat Olam, and I will give you and your children and those after them this land as an eternal inheritance. So
Yeah.
all the Abrahamic faiths agree that the land was given to the Jews by God, to Bani Israel.
Okay.
But because religion is deeply subjective, people
Yeah.
will interpret different ways, and you will struggle to find a Muslim today that believes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Al-Ad al-Muqaddasa to Bani Israel. At least not Bani,
Israel.
they'll say we're not the real Bani Israel, or it was your Qawmi wasn't Bani Israel, it was the believers. But faith is
Yeah.
faith
Yeah.
and it's
That's a religious
personal. So I
argument. Yeah.
think push the religious argument aside for now, because I think that's not what we're getting at. You then touched
Yeah.
on one of the probably the most powerful arguments, and that
Yeah.
is the one of where did the Jews have their ethnogenesis? Where are they indigenous? And indigenous doesn't mean that you're just from a land. It's that your culture, everything revolves and is tied to that land. So the English very clearly came from England. They had a line of monarchies, the language developed, etc. With the Jewish people, everything about our culture revolves around land. We pray multiple times a day to return and rebuild Jerusalem. When we eat food, when we go to synagogue, at the end of our festivals, some of that will say next year in Jerusalem. Like
Implemented in the
the
culture.
entire religion, over half the laws can only be done when living on this soil, on this land. So it's more than just our ethnogenesis. Our entire identity revolves around this land, our collective identity. So that's a very compelling argument to say that if there's any place that the Jews are entitled to a country, it would be here. Now you can argue what that means for other people that are here, and that's a separate
That's what,
conversation.
because
But just
that's what I often hear.
yeah,
That's why I'm
and
asking
then
you, because that's
the next I'd then build on that is there's the argument for necessity. And so the argument for necessity is that Jews tried living under Muslims, Jews tried living under Christians, Jews tried living under atheists for around 2,000 years, and it did not go well for us under any of those. At times, it would be good under a Christian king or a different Khalifa. It would be, depending who, it could be good, but it could also be treacherous. And we had massacre after massacre in Muslim, Christian, and atheist lands.
But I think overall you could slightly you could definitely say that they were treated much better under the Muslims than the Christians, especially if you take into account the 20th, how do you say that in English? Sorry, the 20th century, actually.
20th
The
century, yeah.
20th century,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I'd say throughout our history, as a general rule,
But
up
it's
until
true.
very recently, like the last 70 or so years, life was better under Islam. But that doesn't mean that it was good. And this is one of the misconceptions people make. They think that because it was better under Islam and there was more opportunity, etc., that
Like
it
Morocco,
was.
yeah.
Yeah, Morocco's a great. I mean, even in recent history, Morocco was very good to the Jews. But there were countless massacres of Jews. And actually, one of the most bloody massacres of Jews under any Muslim rule, under any of the Khulafa, was under the Almohads, and they massacred tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Jews, depending on which historians you go to. and they force Jews to
Horrible.
convert to Islam, which goes against Islam. But
Yeah,
and
actually, against. Yeah,
and
to be
so
honest with you, how can we agree on that?
yeah,
At the end of the
and
day,
so
this.
my point, and that's not to speak ill of Islam or Muslims, but this is the history of humanity. Like Muslims kept slave, Christians kept slave, Jews dealt in slave. Our
Yeah,
history as a people is not great, and so
great.
life under Muslims wasn't great. Life under Christians, and so there's an argument for necessity in that the level of massacres that the non-Jews inflicted upon us is the strongest case for the Jews needing a state of our own. And then you go to,
Okay.
okay, so where could such a state be? And then you'll move to the legal arguments. And so who is actually sovereign over the land? Well, for many centuries, it was under different empires, be the Ottomans, the Mamluks, etc. And the Ottomans were defeated by the British. Well, by the
Yeah.
Allies, but the British
I
were
mean,
awarded mandate.
betrayed by the Arabs too, by the way. The
Yeah,
Arabs betrayed the Ottomans from the
yeah,
inside.
no,
But
completely,
yeah, that's
completely. There was a betrayal of the Ottomans. The Ottomans, for whatever reasons, lost the land to the British. So British are now the power that controls the
but
land.
that's also something
And
that, just coming to that point, because otherwise I'll forget. But as you said, the British, I mean, they promised the Arabs, that they'll have like the land of their on their own, not under any other authority. If
they were
they
granted
actually,
that because they said basically west of Damascus, no. And
yeah,
so the argument from the British is Israel is definitely west of Damascus.
uh,
Um, but
yeah,
ignoring
yeah,
the detail, the
okay,
point is that
that's details. Yeah,
it's San Remo. They passed the San Remo resolution that said Britain can have mandate over the territory the British call British Mandatory Palestine on on the condition that they establish a Jewish national home there. So there's now a legal precedent in international law that the Jews should have a country there. So to recap those, international law
hmm,
says that the Jews should have a country there. There's the need for a state because Jews have been persecuted. And then there's the
yeah.
indigenous claim that we are indigenous to this land and it's the only territory on
But you
this
always,
planet we.
yeah, sorry, but you always had Jews living there, like technically speaking, as a
Yes,
minority, but they were always there. They always had a Jewish presence in the land.
absolutely.
You also had Jews that spoke Arabic, even at that time, but they were Jewish. And I think you probably know Salahuddin,
Yeah,
who conquered back the land. He brought the Jewish family. I think they were like something like 10 Jewish families renowned,
took
and he
us. Yeah.
insisted to bring them back
And
to let's call it the land of Judea, but Israel and stuff. So they to Jerusalem in that
Umar
case.
ibn al
But
Kitab was the same. Umar ibn al Kitab allowed Jews back into
oh,
Jerusalem as well.
okay,
And so
okay,
the Christians hadn't allowed the Jews in Jerusalem. So it was the Jews, by the way, were never out of the land, which is what you said. That we lost Jerusalem and we lost sovereignty over the land. But it
yeah.
wasn't. My understanding is it wasn't really until Umar ibn al Kitab that the Jews were allowed back into Jerusalem after the Christians had banished us. So the history here is definitely complex, but I think there's a very strong. Well, obviously think there's a strong case for Jews having a country here. I think where it becomes complicated is what happens to
We're
the other
coming to the point
people.
at the
Yeah,
moment, historically speaking. We're coming to the friction point. Actually, so it's exactly what you said. You said, okay, the Jews first they had a situation, and there's a point, the massacres of the Jews.
yeah,
We're not only talking about the Holocaust, but definitely the Holocaust was, I think, one of the most uh, the worst genocide in human history happening to the Jews, which basically definitely even for the Jews that wanted to stay in other countries, uh, no longer felt safe. So I think even the Zionist movement or ideology earned much more followers. You told me that it was always in Jewish culture, the idea of also coming back there. But I think the perception definitely skyrockets after the Holocaust, because it's not even a question of I want to go back to that land. It's also a question of safety.
Yeah.
It's like no longer feel safe.
I
So I
mean,
understand.
just pragmatically, Israel
Yeah,
was the nation that gave refuge to more Holocaust survivors than any other country. So as
no,
just
no,
a pragmatic,
which is
simple
what,
solution, there's a Holocaust. Where did the
mhm.
survivors go? A huge percentage of them went to the homeland, went to
Yeah,
Israel.
yeah. But now the point of friction is, so let's be clear about something. There were Arabs there, like living in that land. Arabs, you could say Christian Arabs, Muslim Arabs, you also have Jewish, but anyway, they were living in that land. It was not a desertic land where nobody was, living, and they just happened to come back home. They came to a land where people were living. That's what I'm like. First, do we agree on that point, or would you say no? I don't know. Like, what's your?
No, so
Can we
I'm
agree on that at least? That
yeah. I
Arabs were
just to be very clear though, because I think the details do matter.
okay. No, no, definitely details do
I
matter. That's why I'm
the
asking you
majority
before.
population. I don't like the term Arab because it's a colonialist identity. A Jew that speaks Arabic is not an Arab. It's an Arab. If I learn Arabic and it becomes my first tongue, I'm not an
Okay.
Arab.
Yeah. No. 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 No.
So
It's
we
very
consider,
fine.
and so for instance, in Israel it was mixed. You'll have Ashkenazi Jews, you'll have Mizrahi, you have Jews from Yemeni Jews, you have Jews from all over the world living
Yeah.
in Jerusalem. Is a great example. You had the Yemeni village, you
Yeah.
had the Ashkenazi quarter, you had
Definitely. But
and
they
they
were
saw
like, I
themselves
think.
as one people. So the Jews saw themselves as one people, the Jews, and they didn't see themselves as Arab. But that aside, the
Let's take then another term, okay?
but
If you
but what?
ask,
No,
like
you.
instead of
I think it's very fair to say there were people that were living there.
okay, that's what I'm saying.
There were people that were living there of diverse religions. The largest majority of whom were Muslim, and
Yeah,
those
that's what I was
Muslims
gonna tell you. We can agree
largely
that the
would have
largest
considered themselves Arab. Obviously,
yeah,
you would have had Bosniak and stuff like that, but largely these were Arab Muslims living there.
exactly.
So what you did have, the largest majority was definitely Muslim. Like there were 270,000 Muslims living here in 1882,
Yeah,
according to the Ottomans, and I think around 30,000 Jews. So far more Muslims than Jews in 1882.
yeah.
It fluctuates at different points of history. At times, there's
No,
large Jewish communities in places like Hebron, Tiberias, Tzfat, etc. Um,
yeah.
but ignore towards the creation of the state, the largest majority was definitely Muslim. Um, but with the creation of the mandate and the migration of Zionist capital or the flow of Zionist capital into the land, suddenly there was huge economic opportunity and you had a large influx of Muslims moving and an even larger influx of Jews moving. So you had mass Muslim migration into the land and even more mass migration of Jews into the land. And so
which year are we talking?
between the
Like,
year 1882 and 1945, because that's the most accurate read we can have, you had
yeah,
the village statistic report, which the British commissioned in 1945, and I think that found around, I think it's 1.26 million people living, Muslims, Arabs living in the land. So that's come from 270 to 1.26 million in a very short space of time.
mhm.
There is natural birth in there, but there's also massive migration, and
I
that's
really like
fine.
the attention to details. I think it's really important to mention that there were also migration of Arabs. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, okay.
And so that sets a precedent. There's a large block of people here. Now,
Yeah,
the way that nation states have evolved, and it is really as what Zionism was based on, as what all the Arab states that we now see around us were based on, is the right to self-determination for the indigenous peoples of a land, for the nations of a land, which Woodrow Wilson really pushed. And that's why the Jews, being an indigenous people, were awarded their state. But your argument is, well, there's a large body of Arabs that are also living here.
that's what made it complex. That's actually what made the
Yeah.
problem we have today.
I,
Is that these people living there. I'm not talking about the
yeah.
migration because you just mentioned that. I'm talking about the people
Yeah.
that used to live there. Uh, they for them that's their homeland.
I
They
mean,
had their Yeah,
Personally,
yeah,
I think the British fumbled and dropped the ball. I don't like to blame the British because the British get blamed for all the wrongs in the world. But
okay, but
the
in that
British,
case,
I think in this case, did actually drop the ball because they were awarded the mandate on the condition they established a Jewish national home. The
I
first thing
know.
they did to that Jewish national home was give 78% of the land to the Arabs. Now,
Mm,
had they in that moment done what the British did around the world, and not just what the British
yeah,
did, nations did, and there was a population transfer, and the Arabs went to 78% of the land, and the Jews got the remainder, I think we potentially would have avoided decades and decades and decades of conflict. And you would have had a large Arab population in Jordan, and they would have been Jordanian. And
mm,
you would have had
mm,
Israel, which would have been the West Bank, Gaza, and
mm,
Israel, with a minority Arab population for those that, for whatever
yeah,
reasons, didn't move if they didn't get transferred. Because that never happened, um, we've been locked in perpetual war. Now, you can argue that it's not moral, it's not right, but back then, population transfer was incredibly commonplace. India,
yeah. But
Pakistan, Germany, it's just huge. Uh,
I actually totally agree with you. For me, the only problem I have, and that's where my
Yeah,
I guess my argument will deviate from yours, but at the end of the day, we all have our opinions. But from where I actually disagree is it's not a question of disagreeing. It's just from where I don't support what happened is the fact that okay, when the Jews came, some were like allowed to stay. They had their part. Some also some were welcomed by the I won't say indigenous because
yeah,
we talk about that,
yeah.
but let's talk about
But no, yeah, the
the
Arabs,
actual
you can say that the Arabs welcome them. And
yeah that lived there for thousands of years or whatever. So
at
some
least a
welcomed them
thousand
also.
for many of them, and probably thousands for some of them as well. Yeah, yeah. So no argument. Yeah, we've went over that.
Exactly. So some of them also welcomed them. Anyway, so when they came, I think that's where the problem actually when you talk to most Israelis, they would tell you, well, then the United Nation they had they took the decision to kind of split it in two. One part for the Arabs, I think something like 50%. Let's around 45. I don't know, whatever. Or some says they had the best part of the land. But
We
anyway,
don't need to get into
let's
it. Yeah, it's
our.
fine. Yeah,
Oh, give me just one sec.
that's fine.
Give me. Sorry.
That's absolutely fine.
So uh, yeah. So as I said, the one of the biggest. So I was talking. It was split in two, and what I actually don't understand is that the first who took that decision in the United Nations. Like the most of the country that were part of the United Nations at that time were in and of itself like colonizators. So you had the UK, you have France, but you had many countries where first not part of that decision, as you may know, which makes sense because you had many colonies at that time. But apart from that, let's take the decision in and of itself: 50% for the Arabs, 50% for the Jews. Of course, as a Jew, uh, you come there and overnight you have 50% of the land. It's much more acceptable for you to take that deal than someone that had 100%
So
and lose 50%.
I think this is one of the major misconceptions. So the
Okay,
Arabs who
but
were living in the land didn't own the land. Most of the land was Ottoman state land, so it was Turkish and then British. And
mhm,
then the biggest swathes of land were owned by absentee landowners. So, like for instance, there was the Susuk. So I think I've got the name right. I think the biggest purchase of land that the Zionists made was from a Lebanese Christian family. I think they're called Susuk. Um, and that's just one example, but the land itself isn't
mhm,
necessarily owned by the people who are living on it. That's the first major point. So you would argue that the
yeah,
Negev belongs to the Arabs, despite the overwhelming majority of Arabs never living in the Negev. You had Beersheba, which was a small Bedouin community. You had small Bedouin communities, but Bedouin,
mhm,
by definition, were nomadic, and so you get into very complicated territory as to who is sovereign over a land. Now, the second thing, which is even more important, is
Yeah,
that the
sorry.
UN partition didn't create Israel. So the UN partition, the proposal was a proposal. It was, and I think it was 33 nations voted to recognize the partition, so a Jewish state and an Arab state with an international Jerusalem,
Yeah,
and
but you had a lot of countries that were not
and
part
so
of
so
that
I was just going to say
decisions.
two nations
Okay.
abstained. Britain was one of them. Britain refused to vote. Shame on Britain, considering they were only given the mandate on
They were
the
the, yeah.
condition they
Mhm.
establish a Jewish national home. And
Yeah.
the British, not only did they abstain, they then armed the Arab Legion who attacked Israel.
And also, actually, I kind of mentioned that the Arabs that fought, the war that just came right after
yeah,
that, they did not have an intention to create a Palestinian state. They just
yeah,
wanted a part of the cake, actually. So it
exactly. And
so in that, yeah,
and that's the other thing. So when Jordan annexed Judea and Samaria and
yeah,
renamed it the West Bank and made it
mhm,
part of Jordan, they gave
yeah,
everyone citizenship, and nobody Britain recognized it as Jordan. No one
yeah,
batted an eyelid. So the whole thing is an interesting history. But what I was going to get to, what established Israel was the Jews creating independence and
exactly.
then
If
being
it was a
able to
Muslim, it
hold
would,
the territory that they held, and they
yeah,
largely held it along the proposed partition, but with major differences. So we took Western Jerusalem and cut a corridor to Western Jerusalem. The
yeah.
Jordanians conquered East Jerusalem. I mean, Jerusalem had never been divided before, but we split the city. And it had nothing to do with who owned what territory. It was to do with what land did were both sides able to retain, because ultimately that's what creates nations, is the ability to acquire land and hold that land militarily. And the
Mhm.
United Nations was a vote to recognize a Jewish state if one emerged and an Arab state if one emerged. And
Yeah.
the Jews established one, the Arabs never did. And there's a strong argument that there's no, I mean, I believe there's a strong argument. There's never been an Arab country called Palestine. There's no legal precedent. You could maybe argue Oslo is a kind of
Okay,
precedent.
but though on that, I
Yeah.
also often hear that argument that, okay, you could not call it a state because they did not have like how should I say, a leader to lead that state. I mean, at the end of the day, like the terminology of
So
state is given by international law, so it's
uh,
some people that came and had the idea to make it. But does that make you any less worthy of owning your place on that
So
land?
the nation states revolve around the concept of a nation. The
Mhm.
Palestinians, really until the 50s and 60s, definitely the 60s, some could argue the 50s, or no, you
Yeah,
couldn't
yeah.
argue, were not a nation. You can argue they're a nation today and that they've had their ethnogenesis. They are the descendants of people who lived in Western British mandatory Palestine.
Mhm.
Um, they don't really have a common culture, etc., that unifies them all, that's distinct from other people, or religion that's distinct. But those traits are beginning to evolve. So they now have, ironically, all of the things that you would say are Palestinian, a lot of them are British colonial creations. So, like
Mhm.
the kafir, the black and white kafir, the sign of the resistance, designed by John Pasha Glubb, or John Glubb
Yeah.
Pasha. The flag, the red, black, green, white
No, no,
flag,
no, the definitely.
Mark Sykes, the name Palestine, the British
Yeah,
colonial
yeah, as
name,
I told you, I
the
mentioned
the
myself.
the
No,
borders
for me,
itself of who is a Palestinian,
no,
British
the term,
colonialist
the term
geography.
is.
Yeah,
No, no, for that I totally agree with you. Even the term like Israel as a country makes more sense for
yeah.
Muslims than Palestine. You know what I mean? That's Israel is the name of a prophet.
Yeah. Who lived in
Yeah,
the Ad al Muqaddasa? That's
yeah.
we could definitely.
No, no, no,
Yeah. No.
definitely.
So
That's why I never.
and
That's why I never insult. Like that's why I don't like when someone insults
yeah.
that name.
Uh,
So for me it's more all about the government, the actions of um,
Well, what
politics and
what I
so
think
on.
I would say, I think you can argue, or you can argue anything, but an argument that I could potentially get behind is the Palestinian nation has emerged in reaction to Zionism and British colonialism. And an
So
identity's spawned out of that. And then there's a case of, well, do they then have a territorial claim to the land as the
yes,
people who
but
live on the land? Because your argument is basically there were Arabs living, I'm not meaning to simplify it, there were
no,
Arabs
but
living here
in short,
before. There are Arabs
yeah.
that lived in this land.
Mhm.
Therefore, those Arabs have a right to a state. And I think
Yep.
that's I don't think it's
Wait,
obviously
they have a right to a state, you mean? Sorry, I didn't hear you. Or
a right to a state called Palestine in this territory.
oh, no. Wait. No,
Okay, you're not
once
saying
again,
that. Okay,
that's not
I've
what I
jumped a
meant.
step.
No.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Sorry. That's not what I meant. What I meant is that they have the right um to have a homeland,
That's okay.
to be
That's what I'm
part.
saying.
That's
That's
what
what
I
I'm trying
mean,
to say.
to be
Yeah,
part of that land. So
yeah,
see the difference, even if it's under another authority,
yeah.
or so on, but that you know what I mean. It's I give you an example, for
Okay, so
example.
I
Okay.
think we're in complete agreement. I think we're in complete. I think that the Arabs that lived on this land, who
Okay.
undeniably formed an identity out of the circumstances of what they've lived through. I believe that they have a right to a homeland. They have a right to a degree of autonomy. I think you can lose that right. So, for instance, let's say Gaza, Hamas, what's happened there. You
Mhm.
can wage a war as the government, lose territory, and compromise the the rights that the people you were responsible for now have. So, for instance, if Gaza loses territory and there's now a buffer
Mhm.
zone around Gaza because Israel, for
Yeah.
security reasons, doesn't want people living
For
out
example,
of
yeah.
it, then I would say that there is precedent for that, and I would
But
but what I
would you
would
would you find it normal that Palestinians that live in Gaza right now, that ones that have nothing to do with Hamas,
yeah.
would be I don't know, like I would say ethnically
So,
cleansed, which
so
means
ethnically
you know
cleanse is a very charged term because nations
what I
have
mean
engaged. No,
is
no, no.
like
I agree. But what I'm good. So population transfer is something that's happened throughout history, and it's only really with the Yugoslavian wars that the term ethnic cleansing was coined, and the way in which it came about was incredibly violent, incredibly brutal. It wasn't, for instance, how the Ottomans would practice population transfer of Jews. They moved the Jewish communities around. They quite regularly. I forgot that there's an Ottoman term they use for when they would move a population from one place to another. But ignoring the language, I believe my position is any Gazan that voluntarily wants to leave
yeah,
should
should be
absolutely
free to
have the
leave,
right to leave. I'm
100%.
not
And
personally for
mhm.
forcing people at the end of a bayonet to leave.
But don't you but sorry, but don't you think it's the goal of the actual cabinet of Netanyahu? Don't you think
No,
it's
I
the
don't. I
goal?
know Netanyahu has been explicit. The goal is not to forcefully move the
Yeah, but
population.
yeah, yeah, but
There,
all due respect,
yeah.
Netanyahu has lied countless of times. Remember what he said in Iraq. The day you will get rid of Saddam Hussein, it will be, you'll have
Le-
the perfect Middle East. Like most of the
Netanyahu
things he said was, oh, sorry.
Netanyahu may be one of the most formidable Israeli politicians when it comes to staying in power and just being like one of the most impressive politicians there is, but he's not Moses. And so if he makes a prediction for the future, that's very different to if he's saying what's going. So for instance, Netanyahu, I think, has been pretty consistent in what he said he's going to do or we're going to do and what we've actually done. I believe Netanyahu when he says the intention is not to permanently displace the population of Gaza. I believe that. Now, I may be an idiot for believing it.
Okay, I
Maybe history
actually
will
don't,
show me
but I
wrong.
mean, it's
Yeah,
I
neither of us
don't
will know.
because
Um,
yeah, you can see who he choose to be in his cabinet, like
But
Ben
it's not.
Gvir, for example.
This is a misunderstanding of how Israeli politics work. The only,
Smotrich, yeah, sorry, yeah.
yeah, the only reason that Netanyahu is in power was because he was able to make that coalition. And so Israeli politics is coalition based. And so in the UK,
Yeah.
I grew up in the UK. Once the
Mhm.
government's elected,
I
they're
can
there
I
for
can
the
view
next
it.
4 years.
Uh-huh.
And if a government in Israel, the government can fall at any moment if one of the
Uh-huh.
coalition parties pull out. Now, Netanyahu wouldn't have been prime minister unless Smotrich and Gavir, who represented a very small proportion of the vote,
Mhm.
agreed to be in his coalition. And if they pull out, depending on whether he has other partners he can make a coalition with, he loses power. And the worst thing for Israel from security perspective, would be for the coalition to break in the middle of a war. So
Mhm.
Netanyahu is kind of
Yeah.
held to ransom by these politicians. It's not that he's got them
Yeah.
in because he's ideologically aligned with them. It's because he's
But
not
see
in
the
power without them.
the ugly thing is, mainly speaking, what he mostly cares about is staying in power. And I think you know Israeli
I don't think
politics
that
much
is
better
that. I
than I
don't think
do.
that. I mean, yeah, he's phenomenal at staying in power, but I think
And
he's a highly
and
principled person. I think, for instance, peace, prosperity of the nation was hugely important, and now security of the nation. I think these are real. I I believe I'm not one of these people that believes all politicians are crooks and crooked and corrupt. I believe many politicians are deeply principled people. They can be corrupted, but I don't think that Netanyahu's only motivation is to stay in power. I think as soon as the war's finished, he's out of power. Um,
yeah, but see, do you truly think, I really want talking directly
yeah,
to you, do you truly think that continuing the war, eliminating Hamas would actually work? Like, it's been what,
yeah.
2 years and something?
Yeah.
Yeah, almost 2 years,
I think it
and
could work.
they're still there, huh?
I absolutely think it can work. The British or the Allies defeated the Nazis. Like in
Have
a
you?
war, you defeat your
Yeah,
enemy.
but I think this war is more like similar to what happened against the Taliban's. 20 years of war, nothing has changed.
I
They
don't think
just
it's
left and they.
anything. I don't think. Sorry, I don't think it's anything like the Taliban in the sense that
Uh-huh.
America was fighting a war thousands of miles away, and it was a insurgency. So it was a counterinsurgency campaign, which is just it's incomparable to what's happening here. Here,
But I think you can compare it much more than the Nazis, the
I
Nazis.
know. I actually
Yeah.
think it's the opposite. I think the Gaza, whether you agree or not, I mean, is a non-state actor. So it's a weird thing in the sense that they're not a state in terms of they're formally recognized, but they're a government with a military capability, etc. So this is
Yeah,
two
yeah.
nations at war with each other that are bordering each other,
Okay.
and the objective of the Taliban is not to destroy America. The objective of the Taliban is to liberate Afghanistan, in their mindset, from the kuffar, from the Americans. In
Mhm.
Gaza, it's the complete opposite. In Gaza,
Okay. What's
it's two people who believe they have a right to the land fighting each other, and
I agree.
one
I agree. Yeah.
and certainly one of them seeing it as an existential. The Jews see this as an existential war. We believe our survival depends on us having a state. The
Existential. Okay.
the
Fair enough.
Palestinians probably don't see it as an existential war in the sense that there are many Muslim nations with armies that can defend Muslims, but
But
they.
not truly. Like, I think most of Arabic and Muslim country do not care. I'm gonna be honest with you. If they would truly care, do you
I
think
think there's some
why
truth to
why
that.
didn't they act as of now? Like,
So I
you
think
have
there's a
Israel that
difference
is
between
surrounded.
I think there's a difference between taking in refugees and going to war with the most powerful military in the Middle East. Israel is the most
Yeah,
powerful
but
army in the Middle East, and historically, when Muslims didn't realize how powerful Israel was,
no.
they invaded it on multiple occasions. Arab armies united and invaded under the banner of jihad and lost, and it
Okay,
was
but
only after almost a century of losing those wars that
mhm.
they've said, okay, maybe fighting the Jews isn't that sensible.
I think like, I agree with you, but I think if they truly were, um how should I say, if the Arabs truly wanted, like, I'm talking about the leaders, huh? Not the
Yeah.
people. I'm talking about the governments, really. I don't think they truly want a Palestinian state, or at least they're willing to take a risk. And
I agree.
like, you have like countries like Turkey that is okay. Let's be honest. I think Turkey, in terms of military capabilities, they are not that from Israel. I think it's
I
quite,
mean, they
you
said
know,
that about having seen what we did to Iran. Like Iran,
to what?
having seen what we did to Iran. Like we were told that
Yeah, but
Iran was a
Iran
more
is
powerful
nothing.
military than well, no, but for
No,
years we were told
I,
that Iran is more powerful than Israel. Iran, the
no, no, no,
IRGC
no.
will
Iran,
just
Iran I think everybody, like, if you know just a bit of like, how should I say, military, like, history and capabilities and everything, I'm very interested in that. Iran is a lot of, it's a lot of talk. They have like missiles or so,
yeah.
but if
They
we
had the
truly
largest
analyze,
arsenal
like,
of ballistic missiles in the world.
yeah, ballistic missiles, that's what I was going to
Yeah,
say. But if we
after
truly
America.
analyze, like, the weaponry and the equipment and the capabilities, and Turkey surpassed Iran by far. But like, the point I wanted to make is, you have countries that could definitely uh, make Israel struggle, or at least fight for the Palestinians if they really wanted to. What you can see today is a lot of complaints around, like, from the Arab population, is like, why our government is not doing anything to defend the Palestinians or to fight back or whatever. I don't think it's within their interest. That's all that's what
So
my point is. I
I
think it's not.
I agree, but I think it's not in their interest because they'd lose. I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. I think because of
I
Islam,
disagree, but yeah,
because
I think
it's fine. I think, but because of
it's
Islam,
fine. But I think Israel is really strong, but and it's fair enough. Huh? It's a really strong country, but um, Egypt, for example, of yesterday, of the time of Nasser,
yeah,
Jamal Abdel Nasser, is nothing to, like, the abilities that you have today, and like you have Saudi Arabia, and you see how much they bought actually from the US in terms of military capacity. Is it's We're talking of hundreds of billions. I think if we really talking about, like, battlefield and war zone, that would be a different history, a different story. And let's even say that Israel is stronger, okay, and they just don't want to lose, um, knowing the Muslims, how should I say, um, perception of fighting, like,
yeah,
a long history. It has always been motivated by the idea of jihad,
yeah,
So as you can see, not afraid of dying and everything. I think it has changed over time. It's probably a good thing, But what I'm saying is, uh, they're much more important thing to them than the state of Palestine.
yeah,
See, I don't, I don't know. It's just my opinion. I think you don't really, like, of course they care about them, they should care, but do you truly see a lot of action towards, first, they don't even let them in, like Egypt, for example. They don't even let, uh, if they truly care about them, they would let them in right now,
yeah.
wouldn't they?
So I think the people of Egypt deeply care about the Palestinians more than any other
No, the
nation is
people,
going
I'm
to.
only
But the
talking about the
government,
leaders.
yeah, I agree. The government does not want the Ikhwan Muslimin
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
um
in Egypt,
yeah,
because Hamas is
exactly.
originated from
I
the
mean,
Muslim.
the
You're
charter says
actually
they
very,
are.
very knowledgeable. You're very knowledgeable. It's super
No,
impressive,
but
in my opinion.
so we're saying, hey, we're going to same to you. Like, I have a lot of conversations, and you have a lot of knowledge, but people can have knowledge, but I think you have an open mind, and this is very rare for me. Whereas you're very open to the counter narrative, and you've considered it and accepted some parts of it and rejected other parts, which is very rare in this space.
Oh,
I've been doing
really?
this a long time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, it's a shame. I would say it's really a shame. But I understand. My father, for example. So I'm half Lebanese and
yeah,
half Moroccan. I was born in Switzerland, but so my father fought a war. So he fought a civil war
yeah,
also, that in Lebanon, and and of course, with the history of
yeah,
Israel and Lebanon, and you had, like, so even this, like, according to my father's perspective, the civil war uh, started because of the exodus of the Palestinian coming to
Yeah.
Lebanon, because you had the Lebanese, the Palestinian fighting back from Lebanon, you know.
Yeah.
So of course, if you're fighting from a country, Israel would attack that country, which
Yeah.
doesn't make
And I mean,
sense.
that's
Then
the
you had,
latest wave of violence, and that's now why Lebanese governments literally come out and said, like, Iran, we're not letting you
yeah.
back in. And thank God, because,
No. I
yeah,
once again, that's a very good thing. Hezbollah was terrible. Like, let's
yeah,
be honest about that. What they did in Lebanon, and the motivation they hide behind, like they control the country. The whole country was totally controlled by they just wanted more power. They didn't really care about. Um, yeah, I think they. It's not even I think. The fact that they supported Assad also killing
yeah.
his own people. Uh, I don't know. I personally don't like Hezbollah. You know.
On a more positive note, uh, the entire Middle East map, the hierarchy of it, the power
Yep.
structure, has all been completely uprooted, and the Abraham Accords still seem to be in place. And so, on the back of this conflict, I think the what happens in this particular territory between the Israelis and the Palestinians, who knows? Like, genuinely, who knows? I don't think any of our politicians know. I don't think anyone knows like what's going to happen here, because none of us have a crystal ball. None of it. Israel may have been a nation of prophets, but we've got no prophets today that can see the future. So what happens here is complicated. But I think the wider Middle East, I think you're going to continue to see the acceptance of Israel, the weakening of Iran.
Yeah, definitely.
And so hopefully that will see like a stronger Lebanon. It would be amazing to see the Lebanese economy
Yeah.
recovering. I don't trust
But the hate,
Jelani.
I, I, I think the hate towards not only Israelis, towards Jewish.
Yeah,
Listen, you have many Arabs that would tell you, I don't hate Jewish. I actually hate Israelis. You know
yeah.
that, but it's not so true when you think about it. It's mostly they associate the Jewish to what's Jewish people to what's happening in Gaza right now, and even in general in the conflict. So I think the hate. I disagree with you because I think today nowadays the hate just reached a level that is unprecedented. Like I've
I
never.
agree, and I don't think you can. I don't think it goes. I think hate doesn't go backwards. So I don't think it's just the Arab world. The levels of anti-Semitism outside of like in the West is the highest it's been
I
post
don't think it's
Holocaust.
Arabs. You know, there's a lot of
Yeah.
Israelis that keep saying, "Oh, because it's Arabs that
No,
go to
it's
protest, Arabs."
no,
It's
it's
not true.
yeah,
You live in the
liberal.
UK, or you said you're
I
from
mean,
the
I
UK. I
used
don't
to. I
know.
don't. I live in Israel now, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay, okay.
no, I have family in the UK. I know I've got my finger on the pulse. It's ordinary English, particularly middle class,
Yeah.
left wing.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you. Yes.
And
People think it's
on the right in America, you've got an emergence of the right now who've been pro-Israel. They're now pushing against. So your Tucker Carlsons, your Candace Owens, etc., pushing hardcore anti-Semitic tropes. So I think security of Jews outside of Israel is not great. I think anti-Semitism in the Muslim world, the Arab world, is a very real thing. However, that happens whenever there's a war and it goes down. So this war has been one of such levels of destruction and trauma that if they can package a
even for the
solution,
Israeli,
yeah, no,
even
for
for the
both,
Israeli
exactly for
soldiers.
both.
I think we don't talk too much about the Israeli soldiers that are like what 19, 20, just go out of high school and go walk in their like towards their end,
More,
towards their death.
I think more soldiers have died in this war than the '67 war. We've had a huge number of soldiers killed in this, huge number of civilians on October 7th. This is trauma for both nations. So what I'm saying is, I think if our leaders are able to package a solution that moves to a permanent solution, so it's just not another cycle of violence, then on the back
You're
of
talking
this,
about the actual like
yeah,
the,
what happens with the
Gaza.
territory, what happens to the people, what happens to the government, what happens to Hamas, if we're able to actually change something and put our people on a trajectory for success, then it doesn't matter that anti-Semitism is at an all-time high, because that will go down. And as this region stabilizes, even if anti-Semitism gets out of control in the West or wherever, there'll be a place where Jews can come. But I think it all depends on finding it stabilizing this territory, because if we don't stabilize this, the next round of violence is going to be even more bloody. And the worse these cycles of violence get, the more unpredictable it is, the greater the existential threat for Jews here and Jews outside of Israel. So it's absolutely essential that we don't fumble the ball and that we are able to set our people on a trajectory towards success, a trajectory of stability and acceptance in this land with strong territorial claims and an end to this cycle of violence. And so there's many solutions discussed, whether it's the Emirati model, two-state, which for me I think most Israelis is dead, but two-state solution, one state, whatever that solution is, now is the
Whatever.
time. Yeah, now is the time.
Like I actually I did not expect, that we would agree on so many points. I mean, I did not know. I mean,
Yeah.
what I mean, I don't expect is like I've been talking to many people, and yeah, I've been insulted, or and it's a pity,
But that
but I
shows you the
really,
insanity, and my comments will definitely say this: the fact that people would insult you, and you have one of the most level-headed takes. We're not going to agree on everything. We're going to view history differently, but that's everybody views history different. The fact that we can
yeah.
sit down and talk peace and criticize both sides and keep an open mind for what's happened and what could happen. Jazakallah khairan, brother. Jazakallah.
Really, I really appreciate that. Actually, the fact that even like you cited the Quran, or you spoke Arabic to me, and I actually feel a bit ashamed that I don't speak Hebrew. In that sense.
Don't,
But
because I do this every day, so I wouldn't expect you to. I'm like,
okay, but that's a good way to bring people closer. And yeah, I'm among those people that, like, truly I admire. The fact that some people like you could just what you said, like right now
yeah,
at the end, that success for both, like the
yeah,
fact that whatever the solution is, you did not say, I just wish for the Jews that is great, and regardless of what happened to the other, whether they're dead, whether they're somewhere else. But so you view both, even the, I would say, outsider, because you are Jewish, I guess, what you call the outs, like
yeah,
what is not you, basically the
yeah. Our
other.
group, yeah,
You included it in your vision,
yeah,
and you wished it the best,
yeah.
and I'm pretty sure if you see pictures of people being killed in oh, one sec, sorry,
Okay,
but just gonna say something. I think we'll end up on that notes. It was my pleasure. I learned a lot from what you said, and
thank you, brother.
yeah, really.
Same,
One last question, maybe. That's
yeah,
something I was really curious about. Is when you see the pictures of horrible
yeah,
thing, because I've seen horrible thing. I don't know if you saw, because I think there are a lot of also Israelis that did not look
yeah,
also what happening on the other side. But if when you look at kids being killed, and not only kids, we like to say kids because
yeah,
it's really empathic, but when we see people in
yeah,
general being like slaughtered and by bombs and stuff, and of course um, you feel bad, you feel
yeah,
like empathy, and you start to hate who's and and you said something really well. You said the situation is more complex than that,
yeah,
so it is true, and not every Israeli wish that for the others.
yeah,
And but actually we end up where you started. You said the war is horrible,
yeah,
whatever it is,
yeah.
regardless. And yes, but do you wish it to end? Like, is it something you wish it to end, or is it you? I know what you were saying. You wish it to end if Hamas
So,
end up like,
I'd go even further than that. I wish it to end so that will never occur again. Because if it doesn't, then everything has been for nothing. Every life that's been lost was lost for nothing. So if we just, let's say tomorrow our leaders agree to a ceasefire, Hamas release all the hostages, Netanyahu says, okay, we're out of Gaza, Hamas are still in control, we get our people back, and Hamas start planning for the next one, and then in 10 years' time, another 50,000 people are dead. It's for nothing. So for me, any solution has to be a permanent solution. Now, the obvious permanent solution from the Israeli perspective is the destruction of Hamas, But that's only part of it, because what then happens with Gaza? So whatever happens with Gaza has to be one that avoids another conflict like this, because I don't think our people, both people, the Israelis and the Palestinians, can suffer another trauma like this.
Yeah.
It's too much for a nation, and because what happens is both people will go to a darker and darker place.
So I see your point. You're like, we're already too far ahead, so better to finish so it never happens again.
Yeah,
So that's basically your point. Yeah,
but
my point.
not at any cost. So, for instance,
Okay,
if for
okay.
it to never happen again, someone needs to drop a nuke on Gaza City and kill 1 million people. That's not
Okay.
acceptable. So there obviously
Yeah,
there
I
are
think I guessed
limits.
it,
Yeah, yeah,
I kind of guessed it, but yeah, but okay. No, no, I can understand that. Like for me, the fear, like the only difference that I have with that is I also care about the hostages.
yeah,
I think if it continues a bit longer, they will all be dead.
yeah,
You've seen the so I think and so I'm more for a ceasefire.
yeah,
I think a ceasefire first, having a deal exchange,
yeah.
and
Look, if you could
if
have a ceasefire
yeah.
and then a guaranteed solution, then obviously I choose a ceasefire guaranteed solution. But I think that's like a fantasy. Like,
Fantasy.
would you rather go to work or win the lottery tomorrow? I'd rather win the lottery tomorrow, but the likelihood of that happening means I'm going to go to
Of course.
work, and I think it's the same here. Anyway,
Yeah,
brother,
like
I'm going to let you go to
I,
bed, and I'm going to do
thank
this.
you so much. Actually, it was my